The chairman, the top Republican, and the ranking member, the top Democrat on the House Select Committee on Intelligence, Chairman Mike Turner of Ohio and ranking member Jim Himes of Connecticut. Thanks to both of you for being here. I appreciate it. So you've been vocal about the U.S. needing to maintain a presence in the Black Sea. It sounds as though, from Orrin's reporting, that the U.S. has decided to back off a little. Do you agree with that decision? No, and I hope it's temporary. The key is that we have to gain intelligence from the area to be able to give the information to the Ukrainians so they can defend themselves, but also to get an understanding of what Russia is doing in the area. Crimea is an area where they're doing a massive buildup, and it's where they're operating the war. Obviously, that's an area where we need to gain intelligence. We're operating in international waters. That means we're certainly allowed to do so. So, Ranking Member Himes, last fall you went to Ukraine with the chairman here, and you spent 13 hours on a train together. You told the Washington Examiner that was, a good time, a bonding experience for the two of you. Needless to say, the previous chair and ranking member, Nunes and Schiff, those were contentious years. How are you able to block out the noise and do your work in a bipartisan way? How have you been able to achieve that?
Sure, and it was, we're people, and so being able to spend time together and establish a personal relationship is pretty critical.
13 hours on a train.
13
I would
hours
think
on
you're either going to like each other or hate each other by the end of that.
That's not the easiest train ride in the world either. So, but look, I think we both recognize that there's a lot at stake here in having a bipartisan national security focused committee. And what I mean by that is that the American public needs to see that we are open to each other's point of view and that when we disagree, we do it constructively. And the reason that's important is because whether it's the origins of the coronavirus or whether we should send more weapons to Ukraine or whether we should reauthorize surveillance technologies, they need to think of us as people who put the national security first and our partisan interests second. And the chairman, Mike, has been really dedicated to that. And, we're going to make sure that that happens because there's just too much at stake for people to think that we're acting party first.
Yeah, and the Senate has been a pretty good model of that. Burr and Warner, and now Warner and Rubio. It's good to see it back at the House. Is there a specific intelligence-related policy that you two do not see eye to eye on? Well,
I'm sure there's going to be several that we don't see eye to eye on. But like the American public, 99% of all the national security issues really are bipartisan. And the people who work on these issues, whether you're in the Office of Director of National Intelligence, whether you're working for the NSA, whether you're working for the CIA, there are Republicans and Democrats there, too, and they're every day working on those issues. So we're honoring them when we work together on them also. We've made our commitment to that. The Speaker and, Hakeem Jeffries made a commitment. They came before us and they said, look, we want this committee to work on a bipartisan basis. So it's not just us. It's the leadership of the House and all the members of the committee that have jointly made this commitment. We're going to work on a bipartisan basis.
So there's a new bipartisan working group that the House Intelligence Committee announced today focused on the reauthorization of this key section of FISA. That's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which has been controversial in the last few years, whether it has to do with this decision to spy on Carter Page and actions by the FBI, et cetera. It allows the intelligence community to gather a call and text data of foreign targets. Now, the member who's going to lead this group is Republican Congressman Darren LaHood of Illinois. He says he's been a victim of FISA's overreach, in his view, and surveillance on Americans. Does the committee have concrete evidence that FISA has been a force for good and that it should continue, even though there have obviously been mistakes and possibly abuses?
Yeah, well, I mean, let me be super clear on this point. Not only should it continue, it must continue. FISA 702 collection, that's pointed at non-U.S. citizens abroad. And whether it's China or Russia or Iran or anti-terrorism, if that gets turned off, this country is a much less safe country. It is also true that there have been abuses and there has been incompetence in the use of that program, including what Mr. LaHood alleged. So our job is, and I think this is really clear, is to figure out, first of all, how we educate all the other members on what is fairly complicated legal and technical stuff, and then how we put in place the reforms to make sure that those abuses and those incompetent uses that have in fact happened over time, that we put a stop to those things. And that's a great example of where we're going to need bipartisan cooperation, because the truth is there are people on both sides of the aisle who are deeply skeptical of this program. So we've got to convince them with reforms that this program needs to be reauthorized.
Yeah, and even Congressman LaHood, who says he was a victim of its abuses, he wants to continue. So former CIA analyst Patrick Eddington wrote an opinion article in The Hill arguing that FISA should be completely scrapped. I know you disagree. I want to give you a chance to respond. He writes, those who support renewal of Section 702 claim the program is invaluable, yet that claim has never been validated by Congress's watchdog, the Government Accountability Office. And prior government claims about the effectiveness of other must-have surveillance programs have been exposed as false. You disagree?
Absolutely. I mean, first off, the world is not getting more safe. It's getting less safe. And our adversaries are getting more aggressive. Our tools, our ability to be able to spy, to be able to gather intelligence, to be able to understand how our adversaries intend to do both our allies and ourselves harm is even more critical now than it's ever been. There are abuses. We need to fix them. That's why we put this working group together. We put on notice the intelligence community that FISA, in order to be renewed and must be reformed. And we're going to begin working on that on a bipartisan basis. There are solutions that can protect Americans at the same time letting us target our adversaries.
Before you go, I just want to get your quick reflections on this burgeoning partnership between Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Russian leader Vladimir Putin. How worried should the American people be?
Well, it's obviously an alliance of convenience. The Chinese are getting an awful lot of very cheap energy from the Russians. The Russians are obviously getting equipment. And I think what they're not getting in any appreciable amounts, of course, is weapons. And I think that's where we need to be focused right now. It was interesting when they came out of their meeting in Moscow that there was no announcement about weapons. And that's I think, where we really would sit up and take notice. Look, we would love the Chinese to be on the right side of history with respect to this murderous war that Putin is raging. But without weapons, you know, the Russians can't win this war. So for us, that's a red line. I think the Chinese are probably smart enough to know that the economic sanctions that they would suffer, frankly, the judgment of history that they would suffer if they were to militarily back the Russians would be a cost that would be a little high for them to bear.
Chairman Turner, we got to go. Well, go ahead. Make your last point.
The most important thing that happened when he left that meeting, that President Xi said, we're going to make change that hasn't happened in 100 years. He is talking about authoritarian regimes winning over democracy, and we have to make certain that that does not happen.
Well, okay. Chairman Turner and Ranking Member Himes, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Let's do this every week.